Don Bradman only needed to get 4 runs in his last game of cricket in order to have a batting average of 100. In order to get that nice, smooth, round number of 100, he only needed to get 4 runs, and he had an average that was well above that, obviously. Like, that should have been a piece of cake. And on his last bat, he got 0. It's a heartbreaking story, isn't it? He didn't reach 100. He ended with like 99.94. He was so close. He was so close. Don't you think he felt like an absolute failure? Well, that would be ridiculous because 99.94 is a ridiculous batting average and is considered by a lot of sports historians to be the greatest accomplishment in the history of sports. And the second best cricket batsman of all time is like nowhere near that. Maybe like 2/3 to that, I think. But still, there was a very disappointing ending to that career, wasn't there? But who cares about the ending of the career? It like there was this whole amazing through line of this incredible career that nobody will probably ever repeat. But I just used that story as a highlight to when I was learning about Don Bradman. I was like, oh, there's kind of this melancholic attitude toward his success. Man, I feel kind of bad for the guy. Because we tend to analyze an entire event or an entire sequence of events through the lens of how they ended. That last note really means a lot more than it probably should. But that's just how our brain is wired. There's a wonderful book called Stumbling on Happiness, where this guy talks about how he remembered for years that he hated the movie Schindler's List. And his wife was like, what? No, you really enjoyed Schindler's List. What are you talking about? And he said, so we watched it. And it turns out that she was correct, because for 3.5 hours I was absolutely wrapped up and absorbed in this compelling, heartbreaking, just expertly made film. But then at the very, very end, they decided to bring back all the real-life Holocaust survivors to stand at the grave of Oskar Schindler, you know, in this weird cut to reality that I thought was so hokey and such a corny way to end the film. And so for years, I had this overcast of not liking the ending, determining that I didn't like that movie, period. It's ridiculous, but that is just the natural bias that we have toward these things. But that is why, I mean, when we watch a movie in general, I always think about this, like with my own art, I have to make sure that I at least end on an okay note, right? I have to end on a note that maybe it doesn't knock the audience's socks off. If I can do that, that would be great. But I just don't want to detour away from all that goodwill that I built up that entire time. This makes it a little difficult in terms of taking creative risk. Sometimes you do want to end on a sharp note that recontextualizes what came before it. But, you know, you got to be careful with that stuff, is all I'm saying. I also just try to make sure that whenever I'm walking away from an interaction, corny and dramatic as it may sound, I try to just make sure it's an interaction that I will be okay with that being the last one. Because I'm going to remember that. I had an encounter with somebody very, very recently where I walked away even on a good note, and then I stopped for a second and I was like, okay, if you don't say this one certain thing and give just a little bit more affection in that interaction and something were to happen, even if that's a 1 in a million odds that something were to happen in the meantime, you are going to always regret that. That's going to be the sad story that's in your memoir instead of what could be another peaceful entry in it. We really, really do analyze what happens to us through the lens of how it ended. Let's just always make sure that we have a good ending. Like, is that so much to ask? I don't understand people. Truly, I don't. That don't put a lot of emphasis on a good ending. To anything. piece of art, interaction with somebody. I could name more things, but I can't think of them right now, but you get it. And I always want to make sure that if it's multiple people in this interaction, it obviously takes at least two to tango, but it could be a lot of people. I want to make sure that the last thing that people hear from me, the last thing they experience of me, ever, is just one that they can speak at least mildly positive on. The obvious joke is that I finish this by saying something nice to end it on.